Hello. Thank you for joining me once again. I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by Jon Peniel. We are in chapter 14 on page 214. Thank you for listening along. Thank you for joining me, those of you who are joining me for the first time. And thank you for the new subscribers as well. I am very grateful. So, without further ado, let's continue on. We are in chapter 14 at the part of Ascended Masters and Channeling. Ooh, let's hear what has to be said. Ascended Masters and Channeling. The ancient teachings regarding channeling are very specific. However, at the time when I was at the monastery, what is now called channeling was called either spiritualism or mediumship, and channelers were called mediums. For the ease of reading, I will substitute the old phrases that were actually spoken to me by my teachers for the modern channeling verbiage. Ascended Masters. Father, even before I came here, I read and heard about ascended teachers, although they are usually called ascended masters or saints by most people. Some people think it is better to follow them or their teachings because they are higher in consciousness than living teachers. Some even claim they have personal contact with them and channel them. Will you tell me more about this and perhaps what the ancient teachings say? An ancient an ascended master is essentially a true teacher who has left the earth plane and gone on to the next plane. A paradise where all who dwell there have achieved the same consciousness of unselfish love, light, and oneness because of their release from the conscious limitations of the physical plane. They do have greater consciousness, but because of their non physical state and their choice to leave this plane and not reincarnate, their greater consciousness has limited applications and usefulness for those of us here on the earth plane. Thus, they cannot fulfill the duties of or replace the necessities for a true teacher. Early on the path, there are legitimate reasons for some of the kind of interest you mentioned in the ascended ones. People often begin their spiritual quest with a search for truth that brings them to many things, including information about ascended masters. There are books about ascended masters with good and inspiring ideas. When I was young, I was thrilled to find some of these books, but they are only books and can only do so much for you before you must actually do more with your life. Why can't they be as good as a true teacher in the body? It is good to emulate the examples set by the lives of any true teacher, including those who have left this plane. Such masters and saints have left us a history that can help us in our own journeys. They left their footprints on the path through the roses and thorns. But when people take the concept of ascended masters further and consider them to be their teachers on this physical plane and follow what they can only believe to be their teachings, it leaves openings for many problems. In fact, there are serious problems with trying to follow a being that is not in a physical body. But if they may actually have greater consciousness, what could be a problem? Some people also take spiritual advice from disincarnated guides. More about that later. Others have gurus that they never see, never live in the presence of. These situations are similar to having an ascended teacher in that none of the guiding beings are in your physical presence on the physical plane. And unless you are already enlightened, even truly knowing anything about the realities of someone who is not in physical form, let alone knowing their wishes for your guidance, is not really possible with any amount of true clarity. And true, precise clarity is a must in such situations as disincarnate guidance, let alone a teacher and student relationship. Following an ascended teacher or even one who is out of physical contact leaves many opportunities for self deception. It is popular, though, primarily because it provides the perfect rationalization for avoiding real spiritual growth. How does it do that? Because you can seem to be totally involved in spirituality, but still deceive yourself and not face your real issues, your real blocks to separation with the One. How? Because there is room for self interpretation, because they are not before you in the flesh telling you what you need to know with words you or others, witnesses, cannot avoid hearing with your ears, guiding you in such a way that you cannot possibly fool yourself about. That's why following a teacher that is not in an earthly body is much more desirable to the selfish, separate self. You don't have to face up to things you don't want to, and you can interpret their alleged teachings to suit yourself. Just look at the variations of claims made about what the Bible says or what Jesus meant or Muhammad meant. People have burned other people alive in Jesus' name. Do you think he meant for them to do so? Of course not. And even if you believe you are in the communications with an out of body being, such as an ascended master, you cannot be certain what you are letting yourself hear unless you are already totally free from your selfish separate self. In fact, the separate self would consider that a perfect setup. You think you are following a spiritual teacher, but the separate self censors the teachings and remains in control. How could it be otherwise when the separate self controls your subconscious mind and most everything else in your life and mind? I guess it couldn't. See, you make my point. You guess it couldn't. When you are actually in the presence of a teacher in the flesh, your separate self can't get away with self deceptions. There is no guessing, no interpretations, no lack of clarity. When you are in the physical presence of such a one, the teacher actively penetrates and exposes your illusions, saying the truths you need to hear right to your face, clarifying it if the self tries to cloud the issue, leaving no room for misinterpretation and leaving you no room for ignoring or hiding from the truth. When a teacher is physically before you, they will always clearly tell you when you are not being true to your inner being. That cannot be said for an ascended master, guide, or a long distance astral master. Then why would someone prefer to follow an ascended master instead of a living master? Other than that, it's more desirable to the separate self. Have you not heard what I am saying? There is no valid reason for this. After all, a true teacher is nothing but an ascended master that has not left the body yet. A true teacher has experienced the same next step that an ascended master has death. The death experience is the final step in returning to oneness with God and attaining universal consciousness. And that is the major transformation that is vital. But after consciously experiencing death, living true teachers have just chosen to return to earth to help, instead of taking the more pleasurable route of going on to a paradise plane with their enlightened brothers and sisters. See chapter on the death experience for detailed explanation. Another reason for having a living master instead of presuming to follow a dead one is the personal attention and personal guidance that you get from a living true teacher. At best, going to channels or following an ascended master for your spiritual growth would be like learning a complex new skill, like brain surgery. Buy a book or tape. And that's even if the information you are getting is true and not from a faker or a negative disincarnate entity. You can learn knowledge and facts through a book or tape, but to really master a skill, you need hands on interactive help from a teacher in the flesh. Having a real teacher in person, in the flesh at some point in your learning, is invaluable to master a skill, even with minor skills like golfing, scuba diving, gourmet cooking, etc., let alone something like spiritual enlightenment. The more important the skill, the more vital it is to have a teacher with you showing you the rope, especially at the final stages of learning. An inexperienced mountain climber in their right mind wouldn't think of learning to climb Mount Everest with the help of an ascended mountain climber. Yet, the most difficult and important skill in the world, achieving oneness with God and learning to become a teacher, they can supposedly totally achieve with only books and spirit guides? No. In order to learn and develop, we need to try applying what we've learned. Then we need the criticism and feedback of a good teacher in order to develop enough to master the skill. And attaining spiritual enlightenment and breaking free from our programming and the bonds of the selfish separate self is the greatest learning challenge you will ever have. Attempting it without a real living teacher giving you direct, in your face, inescapable, totally clear guidance and feedback is like running around in circles chasing your tail, or competing in the Olympics without ever having a coach. Getting channeled information is not much better than reading a spiritual book. It can help and inspire you if it is true. But even if the information is actually 100% true, there's no criticism to the selfish separate self, no real feedback, no unselfish love to ignite your own, no example of manifesting the universal spirit, and no light to pierce the illusion and confusions the darkness of self throws up around you. How many times have you heard someone channel another being that was getting on the channeler's own case and telling them that they'd better get their act together and change or behave selflessly? Probably never. How many times has an ascended master really made anyone see and face all their real blocks that they were totally avoiding? You can't get away with anything with a real, in the flesh, true teacher. Even this book you are reading now might help you, but it can only take you so far. My dad's better than your dad. Zayn pointed out some other fascinating issues I hadn't considered about ascended masters in a later conversation. Consider this. While some of the great so-called ascended masters are true teachers that have indeed gone on, other famous dead masters whose books you've read are only assumed to be ascended. They continue to reincarnate and are here now in other bodies with other names. You may not know who they are. Some you know now, but you know not yet who they are. This will come to you in time. You and I have been known by many recognizable names. You are considered an ascended master by some, yet you are here in a body right now. You have written many books and spawned religions, but to some, Peniel, you are not so important as ascended master so and so, just because you are only my student and will only be an in the flesh unascended master. But ironically, you are ascended master so and so. I am? Yes. And people are claiming that they are channeling you right now. Even different lives of yours, they are claiming to channel. They are? Who was I? If you need to know, it will come to you someday. Don't go and start getting yourself on an ego trip. You have a big enough one to deal with as it is. You are just cosmic dust like the rest of us. You are also one with and part of God, like the rest of us. You are a cog that makes up the great one. Nothing more, nothing less. This is all irrelevant in certain big ways. While we place all these name tags on various beings that are just part of the same, excuse me, let me read that again. While we place all these name tags on various beings that are all just part of the same one being, we must always remember the inner being is one with the universal spirit, and once someone fully manifests their inner being, they are the same great being before and after ascension. Are these saintly beings any less great because they have chosen to reincarnate again and further sacrifice themselves for you by suffering the pains of living amidst the darkness on the earth, instead of leaving the hardship of this world for the paradise that awaits them in the next plane? No. And, by the way, are you letting people channel you behind my back? Yeah, right. I'm not broadcasting my soul as far as I know. No, you would know if you were dead and possessing someone's body. It's hard to miss something like that. But I could sure have some fun later. Forget about it. To summarize, the inner being of a living master is the same inner being as any other master, ascended or not. Sure, there are subtle differences in the personalities and souls of a true teacher, but the differences are insignificant and do not provide a legitimate reason to avoid a living master in favor of an alleged ascended master. And they certainly don't replace the work that must be done with a living true teacher. Regardless of who has ascended and who has not, the same spirit of all the great saints and sages is one, entirely alive and manifesting through present day masters, now and now in the present always. and it has always been so. The Spirit is one. All inner beings are part of and one with the one universal spirit being. Don't confuse the personalities of spiritual teachers with what they really were and are in essence. The personality is just an aspect or projection of the particular soul, and the particular soul, self, and individual that was actually a vehicle for the one spirit. So they are all really the same inside where it counts. This is one reason why there are such similarities and connections between so many of the various spiritual traditions from all parts and times of this planet. This consciousness is within us all, and manifesting that inner being is a destiny we were all created to fulfill. But, Father, what of the hierarchy? Do we not get guidance from ascended ones ourselves all the time? The ascended ones should always play a direct guidance role in your life after you have achieved enlightenment. After you have completed your work with a living master, your true teacher, and attained universal consciousness, you then follow the guidance of your inner voice and universal will. After this attainment, you have a place in the cosmic order and are connected with the hierarchy, the vast order of ascended masters, angelic beings who exist in interconnected ranks between us and the source, the one. You are thus both guided by and watched over by the hierarchy. But until then, you are indirectly guided and influenced by the hierarchy. Beware of hearing voices or letting any beings possess you to speak. That is not the way of the hierarchy, other than highly exceptional circumstances, and even then through one of the enlightened teachers of the Law of One, not a student such as you, elder or not. Who is the highest of consciousness in the hierarchy? You already know that. Well, I think so. Don't you? Don't think. No, you know. I'm sorry. God? It is all one, certainly, but remind me to give you some history text to read. God is all. That's why we call God the universal spirit. But that includes the hierarchy. It is not the hierarchy in and of itself. The head of the hierarchy is the entity who first led the second wave to rescue those of the first. Can you remember that now? Yes, of course. I'm sorry. It is Jesus. When our order was founded, he was known in that life as Grandmaster Thought. Hopefully, I'm not pronouncing it wrong. Thoth, Thoth. The life in which he had his greatest impact on the world, other than his first, was his last, known as Jesus. Although he had great effects and would be known to you by other names from his other lives. Like what? Go fish. What? Learn your history, son. There are more than 24. Will you tell me just one at least right now? Joseph. Go read the biblical scrolls about Joseph and see if you can't feel inside yourself that the same inner being was the same. Witness the unselfish love, the humility, the forgiveness. It's so obvious to the open mind, even if you haven't read the scrolls detailing his incarnations. You were even related to him in the flesh more than one time. When was that? Who? I have other things I must attend to, and your ego is big enough already. How could how could he leave me cliff hanging like that? True teachers can be so damn agmatic sometimes. But what can you do? You can't live with them and you can't live without them. Okay, I'm gonna stop there to upload because from this point there's no breaks in between. So I'm stopping on page 218 at the point of stay tuned to this channel. Okay, and we are in chapter 14. This will be part 1. Thank you for listening. Please share the information if you find it worth shareable. And subscribe if you haven't subscribed. And until the next time,